Hello, everyone. My name is Elaine Doyle, and I'm a member of the TRN Steering Committee. After our first online TRN conference in September 2020, some of us felt that there was an appetite for tax educators to get together just to have a very open discussion on tax teaching, learning and assessment in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. And we therefore organised an event on the 3rd of December and invited TRN members and any colleagues to come together to participate in an open discussion on how teaching, learning and assessment is going for us all. We really wanted this to be a platform for sharing ideas, maybe also talking about challenges that are kind of unique to tax educators who are bound by their jurisdictional rules and also by annual updates, making it a little bit more difficult to replicate material from year to year, or having big publishers provide us with huge banks of questions like maybe some of our accounting colleagues have. So we brought the group together and very quickly broke out into small breakout rooms where there was just maybe 5 or 6 individuals talking through a number of different themes, which were quite general. So we looked at advice that somebody would give somebody who is starting to teach online for the first time. We looked at how we would assess, evaluate and give feedback to students in an online environment. We talked about how we engage students in an online environment and keep them interested and engaged with the material. We looked for ideas around clever tips or tools, techniques that might help student engagement or help us to manage our work and moderation a little bit more effectively. And finally, we questioned perhaps whether the graduates that are coming out of our programs now will have different characteristics, I guess, to the ones that would be pre-COVID. So whether the crisis has meant we have a different type of graduate coming into the accounting and tax profession. So what you're going to hear now is the recorded feedback from those different discussion rooms, each of which were moderated by a moderator who is feeding back on those discussions to capture the broad themes, I suppose, that emerged from tax educators during those breakout sessions. So hopefully there'll be something there for everybody to learn from or to help with the burden for next semester. So in my group, we were talking about the first theme that we talked about, which we might go around all of the moderators on this and take each theme as we go through, was if you were speaking to a colleague who had never taught online before, what is the one piece of advice that you would give them in starting from your experience since last March? And I think that the really strong feedback from our group was just the planning and the amount of work that went into things like module maps, really trying to bring all of the jigsaw pieces together in the module so that you have your content, your questions, quizzes, activities, and also thinking very, very much upfront about how things are going to be assessed, and almost then working back from the assessment to ensure that the students have all the building blocks to get to that final piece. And also, I think colleagues did mention it was an opportunity for years. I think a lot of us have said, "Oh God, I must relook at my module," and you just don't have time with everything else that's going on. And this summer forced us, probably sacrificing any sort of leave at all to actually kind of sit back and say, okay, well, how am I looking at this? How am I assessing it? Are there better ways of doing things? So clearly mapping the structure for the students as well, being very, very clear on what's required each week, checklists and really, really good, strong structure in a way that probably we may not do if we're teaching face to face. So I think that was the really strong view from our group on that advice to a new colleague. I don't know whether any of the other moderators had anything from their groups that was different.
No, that's interesting. Unfortunately, from our group, if you know me by now, we get through all of the questions. But we did touch a bit on some of the bringing close to question 3 without covering question 3 yet, of the issues of trying to set up online and making sure that their students are engaging online, there is a resource constraint. And I think that's the issue, to make sure we can complete the learning outcomes and the whole point of designing a module. So yeah, there's a few issues with that. And we were just discussing on how we could actually go maneuvering around that, really. Yeah. But that was our concern.
Did you get to that one?
No, we really didn't. We hardly moved off of the one question that we had. But the one thing I think that fits in here is have your tech ready to go. And that was a real issue, I think, with different universities and different provisions, whether or not you're working on personal laptops or, a university laptop. Do you have the tablet that can write on the whiteboard and whatnot? So I think the tech was a real issue and still is in a lot of respects. Sorry, but yeah, go on to the next question then, Elaine.
Okay, Terry might lead us off in this. So we were looking at the whole idea of assessment, evaluation, feedback, and particularly in the context of the fact that many of us will be teaching modules that are linked in with professional exemptions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We had quite a lively debate on this sort of on this area, and basically we appreciate that we assessed more, that because we were online, we felt that we needed to give students more regular testing to get them engaged with the material. And we saw, I guess most of us had 24-hour exams when we went and switched from face-to-face and, sort of invigilated in-person exams. A lot of us had the 24 hours, and we realized that had its issues. And then some of us went on to, if you like, more timed exams, and where we saw, if you like, plagiarism and the issues around sharing of answers became less of an issue, because students just don't have time to be able to, sort of converse and discuss as well as, do a good performance themselves. So we saw that as, as an improvement. I think we also talked about proctoring and the issues around proctoring, and that, Sigrid had some really good experiences there. Well, not good experiences, but they learned a lot from the experience they went through. And I suppose that's why in the UK we are less reliant, although, that may not talk for everybody here, but I know sort of in Swansea, we're not going down sort of the proctoring route, but for professional exams, we are time limiting. So, that was something I suppose we're on the same page, and we're having similar experiences. Let me see what else we got. Open book exam approach was generally, the approach for most of us. So, you can't really limit students in the things they can access. Some of us are using quite a lot of tech in that we're doing MCQ type questions. I'm doing that, and Sarah from Bangor also having MCQs. We realized that from that experience, there's probably more effort coming from us than there is from the students, because they just tick a box. Whereas the effort we've put in to write the questions and write, if you like, incorrect, wrong answers and alternative questions, was quite time consuming. And if you're going to do it well, you've got to prepare and plan, and then also get to grips with the IT side of things as well. We're seeing different platforms, but working in a similar way, so that you're trying to limit, student cheating, but also giving it a fair sort of test as well. I think, I did want to add something on the IT. I think the general comments from our group was to a new colleague starting out is to keep it simple and to only build up with the IT if you're feeling comfortable and if you feel, you're sort of ready. And that, from the experiences I've got, sometimes we bound ourselves up with IT, and our students are having a very different experience, that they don't have access to the same, sort of setup. Like yourselves, you're probably surrounded by screens. Some of the students join the session with just a little mobile phone. So what you can do on there compared to what we can do, sharing screens and bringing up lots of different windows, is a very different experience. So I thank my group. It was a good session.
Great. Phyllis, did you want to add anything on the assessment?
Fernando brought up something interesting. He's actually bringing in some formative assessment, but giving the students a bonus point or bonus half of a point or whatever for their assessment, which actually got a few of them over the line. And they quite enjoyed, I think, the ability to be assessed throughout the semester. That kept them on track and kept them engaged. But there was a bit of a discussion, and this is where we kind of got to the end of our time together, whether or not that would be accepted by the PSRBs. And it appears, and correct me if I'm misquoting you, Fernando, but the PSRBs are actually encouraging more formative assessment besides just the summative assessment to satisfy their curricula. I don't know if you've come across that, Terry, in your discussions with the PSRBs. The formative assessment, using formative assessment to kind of tick that box, of measuring.
No, we haven't found that. I think what we're looking for is if, say, for example, the professional body had a 3-hour exam, then through our assessment methods, however that is, you're looking at a similar, number of hours. So it is, if you like, a robust exam approach. But in Swansea, we find that more than one module provides an exemption. So, for example, for tax, it takes 2 of our modules to get, the FX module. So that's easily, sort of accomplished. I think, having more regular assessment is generally for engagement and making students sort of engage early on. Otherwise, once you've lost them, you've sort of lost them for good then, so to speak.
And we were also very interested to know how you might have considered preventing cheating. So was it Mary that said, or was it Angela that said that she wrote 5 different questions, for the students and still found cheating, which was really quite disheartening. So how do we, when we're giving them 24 hours, to satisfy their summative assessment, how do you guard against that collusion? I mean, it's so difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, one of the things our group talked about, and we're doing in UL, and I think Andy was saying the same, is we are getting them to complete the assessments in their own handwriting. So for me, I have a timed exam, but they have to physically do it and scan it and upload it. So that just means they can't copy and paste from each other. Even if they take a screenshot and send it on to a colleague, they're still going to have to write it out. So I think that's one of the ways. We also have them sign an honor code, which we kind of designed to say they're not giving help, they're not receiving help, but also that we reserve the right to orally examine them on any aspect of the assessment afterwards. Now, whether we have the capacity or the resources to do that is not, but I think we have them sign that and send it back in. So I think maybe it just makes them a bit more conscious of the fact that we are monitoring things.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you.
Rex, was there anything from your group on assessment?
It seems like some of the questions are wrapping into one, which is actually pretty good. And we did approach this in that angle, as mentioned earlier, in terms of engagement. That we've got a couple of colleagues like Nikki Thomas and Emma who have looked into multiple choice questions as a form of giving a little bit of summative to just track the engagement at the same time keep them going. And what was quite clever as well is identifying a way in order for students to have a grace assessment in the terms of, yes, we're assessing you with 5 summatives, but one of them may not count. So the best 4 will go ahead so you can learn from your mistakes, because there's usually teething problems with these changes. So we found that interesting. But in terms of multiple choice questions with the complete exam, I am intrigued to find out how we feel about follow-on marks, because usually we have the ability to provide follow-on marks to students if they get something wrong somewhere. We can continue the marks, but it's very difficult to do that in multiple choice questions. So how do we go around that? Other than that, we were talking a lot about assessments, once again with engagement. So I'll talk about it when we do question 3 on that one.
Okay, anybody want to add in anything on assessment that we haven't covered? Okay, Rex, will you?
Yes, I'm about to repeat myself. So
yeah, sorry. Your group was looking, well, primarily, or the starting question was how do we engage students in an online environment?
I think it was a challenging one, but everyone agreed, providing there was resource to do it, that having multiple choices or even having some sort of polling within sessions allows us to actually speed up the process of identifying students who aren't engaging and those who are getting to grips with it. So we do find, for instance, I use Zoom, and Zoom, you've got polling to see how students are finding certain questions. We've got preset polls, we've got preset quizzes, and they're assigned to the students themselves. You can see who's got it wrong and how they feel about the sessions. And we can see from the other colleagues as well that you can see from the MCQs who's actually attempting it, number one, and who's doing well on it, number two. But the problem we have is, yes, we can identify engagement much quicker, but do we have the resource to try and follow on from that? So usually what we tend to find is students have a different pattern of learning. So what we identified is with this online approach, there's more convenience. And with more convenience, students are looking at material at 10 o'clock, let's say. And there's some sort of spontaneous reaction to this and saying, you know what, I need to get to this teacher right away. I need to solve this. So you'll get an email at 10 p.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Sunday, and you're thinking, how do we balance that out? And the group all together came up with some interesting ideas. And we thought of trying to create some sort of structure within the module, some ground rules to say, look, if you have an idea, try and post it on a discussion board, which reduces the amount of repetitive solutions to queries. And it also allows students, as Mickey said, to think about what they're asking. And when they ask the questions, we can provide a solution that supports everyone and get students to actually facilitate themselves in answering the questions too. So we get a bit of community going on, providing they know what they're talking about as well. So yeah, we saw a bit of that going on. Let me just see if there's anything else I may have missed. Yeah, I think that's about it in terms of question 3, in terms of trying to get them engaged with the online material. Everyone talked about making sure we are looking at giving good seminars, having the cameras on. How did students take on having online sessions with the potential to have the cameras on to get audio going as well? And what we find that there's, again, teething problems. Naturally, students are trying to figure out what the environment's like, and over time they start to get comfortable and start to participate in any way, shape or form. In my personal experience, I think students prefer not to put the cameras on, but prefer more polling and anonymous feedback as a type of engagement.
Great. Terry, did your group get a chance to talk about engagement?
Sorry. Yeah, briefly we did. What did we do? I think we were using breakout rooms. I think, you know, there was a little bit of a mixture in the sort of the software that we had available to us. But I think for some, breakout rooms were very successful to try and get students to engage, and some was not so successful, that students felt a little bit more sort of uncomfortable in sort of working in a group. And myself, I've got quite a large group and used breakout rooms, but I found that the students did not speak to each other at all. You know, sort of it's cultural, and you know, so for some it did, you know, it did work quite well. But then you know, you're trying to assign. So the engaged students, they perform really well. They like to take a lead-in role. But as I said, the shyer students tend to shy away. But yeah, so that was some of the sort of areas that we were what we were looking at. And as you said, you know, sort of trying to test them more often, you know, either formatively or summatively. Thank you.
Yeah. Phyllis, did your group have anything additional to add to that?
Well, just to echo, the polling was very popular, and the students particularly like the competition. You can actually see who's engaging and who isn't, and then the students are saying, okay, call out the ones that aren't engaging and we'll, you know, name and shame them. Or there might be a you know, the first correct answer, that kind of thing. So that was big. Yeah, mixed feedback on breakout rooms. You know, some work really well and some don't. I quite liked one contribution. Again, this is from Fernando, where he had pulled together several seminar groups for a larger group. And that was a dedicated 2 hours of questions and answers, but it wasn't actually facilitated by the lecturer. It's the students coming together and identifying the areas of confusion and helping each other and getting them to actually, support each other in their learning, which seemed to be done quite successfully, at least in the Netherlands. I think that's it. I think the polling seems to be the favored one.
Yeah, it's interesting, just in terms of from our group, and it speaks again to the polling. I had to set up, I don't know how many discussion for every week's content I had and I was trying to get the students to post questions on discussion forums, but it's not anonymous and they just did not engage. So I think our group talked a little bit about the fact that, they don't want to be seen to ask a stupid question or to be identified, but if you can make those questions, if the students were able to post anonymously, I just found the entire semester they're just emailing me directly, no matter what I did, and you didn't want to not respond to emails, just given the environment we're working in. So I think the polls probably picked that point up, that it's anonymous potentially as well. I think our group talked a little bit about the fact that the whole level of engagement thing, or lack thereof, may not necessarily be a COVID related issue, but we're just seeing it more obviously because we're working online. So when you think about it, you have the class in front of you, you may not know, the 30-40% that don't turn up, whereas you're seeing it. I think we're probably monitoring stats and so on much more readily because we're worried. And then you think, well, actually, is this much different to what normally goes on? You're just not so worried about them because they probably are with their class groups and they're having coffee and they're in the pub or whatever, whereas they're just not. So I think we're probably feeling a bit more responsible maybe this time around. That was sort of the feedback from our group, was probably a bit more negative, saying, yeah, they just don't like engaging. And we seem to be jumping up and down to make, design activities and create communities and do breakouts. And, it is frustrating then when you feel like the students just don't want to engage. It's probably a bit more of a negative discussion in our group, but I think it's useful to think about the anonymous posting. And
sorry to add as well, just reflecting on what you're saying, and speaking of which, when we show that we're recording the session, we get a totally different behavior from students to when we are not recording the sessions. And when we're having informal sessions on Zoom, again, totally different behaviors. And reflecting on that, it also reminded me that being as relaxed as possible and not being hyper professional in our delivery actually helps them feel more comfortable about it. So if I'm stiff-faced staring at it with white walls, they do not engage. But if I'm eating my breakfast saying, sorry guys, just quickly going through this, they feel a lot more comfortable because they feel like, he's a human being. So such things do help students engage in sessions.
Fantastic.
Can I add in there, Elaine, just from our group, we saw that as an issue, and also in some of our institutions we had captions, and we were saying that initially we all wanted to be multi sort of professional, and students don't want that. We are human, we make mistakes, correct it, carry on, business as usual. And some of my colleagues were correcting all the captions to make sure the spelling is right, the words are right. It is just a tool that's automatic. We just, some of the suggestion is just let it happen. It's an additional tool. The main thing is just listening to the voice. So, it's being relaxed about doing what you normally do and use the technology or ignore it, So take a balanced approach.
Okay, we then had, I suppose, and Phyllis was maybe talking about this with her group primarily, but just whether there's kind of clever, we called it clever clogs, but clever tips or tools or techniques. They could be quite simple, but things that either the students really liked or would be clever ways of us saving time, or just being organized, I guess. Phyllis, did you?
Yeah, I think, was it you, Elaine or Terry, that said, as far as the technology is concerned, keep it simple? It might have been Terry. And just to highlight or illustrate that, Angela said the best investment she made was an actual real life board and a selfie stick, and the students like that better than the Zoom whiteboard or, you know, working through a problem in Excel or whatever. So it just gave them apparently the impression that, you know, they were really in the room and they could actually engage with her and ask her questions as she was solving problems. So that was a nice takeaway. What else? We talked about Padlet, the anonymity of discussion boards and whatnot also came through. I think Benita mentioned that there was more engagement when they could actually not be identified with their question or their contribution, which is interesting. What else? I did post in the chat this wheel of names. So if you wanted to call students out, you could actually very quickly cut and paste your register into this little piece of online software and spin the wheel, and that person would have to answer. And my students have actually quite enjoyed that. That's a little low tech, but good fun. Yeah, I think that's, what else? Yeah, it's just, again, you know, I think the polling was the one with the gold stars for sure. The subtitles, that was something that you were talking about. I guess you called them captions, Terry, was a real a good one. And you're right, they don't like the corrections. Angela has a wonderful nice Scottish accent that certain words came through very funny translations, and she just let it go and the students enjoyed it. You're right, they don't read it, so just ignore it, don't waste your time. Something else might pop up, but I'll throw it out to the rest of you. I'm sure you had a few other things come up in your groups. Elaine?
Yeah, again, Padlet was mentioned. I know I used, and again, it must be available on most VLEs, just checklists that the students could tick off every week. And that was the one that they fed back that they really liked, because it kind of kept them organized. I love checklists, so I didn't know whether I was imposing that on them, and then they loved them. And I was thinking, okay, our accounting and finance students self-select for a reason. Peerwise is one that I've used. I think I've talked about it before, and that's where the students create their own multiple choice questions. And it's a student centered, so they upload them, but they get to answer each other's and so on. So you're kind of creating a bank of questions and a resource for all of them. I've posted the link up to that. And Mentimeter, I think, was also mentioned in our group. So I don't know whether, you know, again, I think a lot of people just felt that these sort of tools just break up the videos and the content in a way that's just a little bit more engaging. Yeah. Rex, did your group have we lost Rex? Or Terry, did your group have anything to add?
Well, we didn't quite get to this one, but we were talking about using the quizzes within our VLE softwares. I mean, personally, I use Google Sheets, which is making everybody join in on a question, but it is anonymous. You know, again, not everybody joins in, but if somebody joins in and does something, that is helpful. I also use Kahoot, which I think is similar to Mentimeter. So, you know, having a bit of fun, a bit of competition against each other. So, yeah, so those sort of areas, really.
Good stuff. Is there anything that we haven't covered? Okay. Finally, I suppose we did. I don't know whether anybody kind of got to the question, and we touched on it in our group. We wondered, I suppose, about how the current situation is going to impact on students that will be coming out into the profession, you know, next year, the year after. It may depend on what year they're in, and whether they will have a sort of a different profile, or they will be different from previous students. We didn't really just get into too much discussion on it, other than our students in UL would have been on placement the third years, the fourth years, the current fourth years would have been on placement in the middle of the lockdown. So they would have had 2 months of actual 2.5 months of being physically placed with an employer, and then they often were sent home with their laptop and they had to work from home. And they sort of feel at an advantage almost, because they knew their teams, they were inducted into the job physically, and then they knew what they were doing when they were sent home. And they were also everybody was struggling, so they weren't struggling any more than anybody else. So they had that experience, and now they're back in college. I suspect the current students that will be going on co-op placement in January, who some of them haven't got placement because of the situation, they may be impacted, differently. So we didn't really get into much discussion on it, other than to say, I suppose everybody's had a different experience, so it's something to maybe monitor. Don't know whether any of the other groups got into chatting too much about that. Phyllis?
We only touched on it ever so quickly. And we thought that these students might actually have a bit of an advantage in that they almost have to be more self-reliant, resilient, more taking ownership of their own education, because we're not on campus for them to drop on and rely on. That they seem to be forming little groups, whether it be Zoom sessions or WhatsApp groups, and helping each other through the content. So again, this could be seen as a possible advantage in skill development.
I'm conscious of time now, and I don't want to keep people, because I know people's time is precious. But just one final thing that came across from our group, and I'm sure is echoed across all of the groups, is that it has taken so much time and so much effort to do what we're doing, particularly in tax, where we probably are recording stuff that we won't be able to use next year because all of the rates and things will have changed. So and I suppose a recognition that everybody's research agenda, if they're doing research, has been shoved to one side. And I think it's sometimes comforting to hear that everybody's in the same boat and I'm not the only one struggling with that. So I think that it's worth recognizing, and also just colleagues saying, at an institutional level, sometimes there isn't a recognition of how much we have to update every year, which just means any resources we create are typically not terribly usable next year. I mean, so we might be able to reuse some things. So I think it would be useful if there was an appetite to have the TRN facilitate maybe, certainly sharing tools, and maybe going beyond that and sharing, other resources, even things like, case studies or, whatever people feel comfortable with. So I think there may be final words, but I don't want to keep people for too much longer. So I just want to thank very much Phyllis and myself, who were the ones who kind of said we should do this, and then Andy jumped on board, and then Terry and Rex very kindly agreed to help out with the facilitating. So I'd like to just thank them all very much, and thank you guys for contributing, because I think it's really nice to just get us together as a community to just have an open discussion around teaching. But other people may want to say a final word. Andy,
yeah. Can I echo that on behalf of the TRN? This is the first time we've done something like this. This wasn't my idea, and much as I'd like to claim the credit for it, it was the smart idea of Phyllis and Elaine's in doing something like this. I think this has been a great session. I've learned all kinds of really interesting things. Not only is it lovely to be able to see you all and be able to interact with you all, actually to have a group of people who are willing to turn their cameras on, unlike so many of our students, was really nice. I've had a really good session this morning. So thank you all, both only the facilitators and all of you being willing to give up time this morning to come and share so willingly of your experience. So thank you all for being part of this today. It's been hugely appreciated.